Hello, my name is Leo Saguiguit, and I'm the saxophone professor at the University of Missouri School of Music. In this video, I'm going to perform this year's etudes for the Missouri All-State Band auditions for saxophone. At the end of each excerpt, I'll give you some helpful hints to help you in your practice sessions. We'll be focusing on the two main etudes in this video, but if you would like to hear audio recordings of the Universal Prescott excerpts, you can download them in the link in the description below. So for the etude on page 5, this is a very lyrical etude, and the priority is on expression and phrasing and the beauty of your tone. So pulse is less of a priority, so there can be a little bit of rhythmic flexibility within the pulse. But always be sure you're aware of the context of the pulse so that you're working within the framework of the time. Since it is very lyrical, there will also be a lot of attention to your tone quality. And you're going to want to use some vibrato. So if you've not been using vibrato, this is the perfect time to start because it will enhance the expression of this music. Now, there's not a whole lot of vibrato that is necessary, but there are some nice moments that a bit of vibrato will add warmth to it. So in order for this to happen, you have to really have good air support and know where your phrase is going. So that is the important thing, is to know what your phrases are. So let's talk about tempo. The marking says moderato assai, which really means very moderate. So this means not too fast and not too slow. It also says it's in 4, so that it means that the 8th note is going to get the beat. So you want to avoid going too slow. Even though this is a lyrical etude, there is a little bit of lilt and motion in this particular excerpt. When it comes to interpretation, the syncopated figure at the very beginning really gives that feeling of lilt, and it characterizes the music since it'll come back every now and then. So look for the arches in the phrases. The first phrase is 4 bars, while the second one is slightly extended. And then after the repeat sign, you can tell a shift in the mood because it moves towards the major key. You'll see more accidentals, and the rhythms are quicker. Now, when you get to the 30-second notes, don't freak out. Really keep it in control and within the pulse. They're not going very fast. And when the first section returns, be sure that you go back to the first style that you started with. Now, at the very end, you'll see a quasi-cadenza after the fermata. And this is really kind of a freer place because you're setting up the very ending of it. So make sure you don't rush the 30-second notes. You can take a little bit of time at the beginning and then kind of push your way forward, and it can be a little bit freer. Now, in terms of dynamics, they're very important to the expression of this etude. So be sure to follow the written dynamics, but you can also enhance them by exaggerating in certain places and creating more subtleties within these long stretches of a single dynamic to make it just a little bit more interesting. For example, the first section is indicated with just piano, but you can give it more shape and direction by adding some crescendos and decrescendos. Keep it really subtle because you want to try to keep it in that same dynamic framework. And then follow the shape of those phrases. The articulations are always interpreted according to the context of the style. So you'll see accents and staccatos here, but be careful not to over-exaggerate these. We don't want to play the same kind of staccatos and accents that you would play in something that might be a little bit faster. So these are more subtle, and you want to make sure that it stays within the mood that you want to create. So when it comes to the accents, think about leaning into the notes. You want to articulate them and give them a little bit of weight, rather than stinging them with a hard tongue. Otherwise, it will really disrupt that kind of mood that you're trying to create. And then in terms of the staccatos, think of it more of a lift rather than short and pecky. Sometimes you want to over-exaggerate those, but in this context, because it's a more lyrical one, we don't want to go overboard. Always consider alternate fingerings to make passages sound as smooth as possible. But don't compromise the pitch, since some alternate fingerings may not be in tune depending on your instrument. And if you are playing on alto, that fingering may not be as in tune as if you're playing it on tenor or baritone. So for example, in measure 3 and measure 6, you have the opportunity to use an alternate fingering of using a side C. All right, so sometimes that side C, which is this fingering here, I'm sure most of you are already familiar with it, that gives a nice smooth sound, but sometimes it can come off as being flat, so you have to be really careful with that. The other thing that the other place you might consider is using the side D. Now, this may not be as familiar with you, but side D you can play, or D, the middle D, you can use one of these palm keys in order to make it sound smoother. The long D can make the timbre sound very different. So if you're going from C to D and coming back to C, and you're not going beyond that D, it makes it sound a lot smoother if you stick to the palm keys. Now, the intonation can vary quite a bit on that. So you want to experiment. Sometimes you can play this, especially on tenor. I'm just using the palm D, so it's going to sound like this. As opposed to, you can hear the difference in the timbre so it doesn't break. Or if that can also be not quite in tune, sometimes you can use your second finger, the regular C fingering, and adding the second one. But as you can tell on the tenor sax, it's slightly sharp. So I'm going to go back to the side D. So it's always going to depend on your instrument. For example, on alto, I use the other fingering, but on tenor, I'm going to have to use this one. So look for the instances where you can use any alternate fingerings and to make it sound as smooth as possible. So the etude on page 7 is a technical etude. So the emphasis is really on the pulse and the clarity of your notes. So the evenness of your fingers and the rhythmic flow is very important. So fast tempos will vary from etude to etude depending on the context. So you don't always have to assume that allegros are a specific tempo. So the key is finding the tempo that you're going to be able to play with it with control and accuracy and still convey the spirit of the music. When you are starting to learn this piece, you must start slow and get familiar with the notes. The key to learning things more quickly is to really look for patterns. And in this particular etude, you'll see the chromatic scale, which you should already be familiar with, and lots of arpeggios and chords. So you want to isolate these to really develop the muscle memory because they're going to keep coming back. And make sure you incorporate the accurate articulations and dynamics at these slow tempos so that they get ingrained and you develop the muscle memory and make it easier for you to learn it faster and play it with more consistency. In other words, don't wait until you feel like you've got the notes down to finally add all the stuff to it. Make sure that you're adding that in as you get faster and faster. Let's talk a little bit about the tempo. Now it says allegro, and we all know what that means. It means fast, but like I said, everything is relative. So it's really more about conveying the energy rather than the pure speed. So one of the things that are going to limit you on how fast you can do it is that there are these staccato passages. So you want to find a tempo where you can really play those staccatos nice and cleanly and evenly. You don't want to skip out on that. In terms of the melody, there's not a real traditional melody to this per se, since there's very little rhythmic variety. So the real emphasis here is on the harmony. And you can see this because it's mostly arpeggios, which creates the chords, and that creates the harmony of the piece. So look for these arpeggios patterns, as I said before, isolate them, and then they will continue to recur. And then you want to connect them to each other. For example, the first measure is an F major. Then in the second bar, it goes to B flat major. And then for the next 2 bars, it's an F major. And then in bar 5, it goes back to B flat major, and then back to F major in measure 6. In bar 7, it goes to the G dominant 7th, and then it resolves to the F major. Now, the point of this is not having to label the music theory behind it, but just so that you recognize that these are just patterns of chords, and you can and you want to be able to hear how the harmonies are changing, and you're developing what that feels like to play that. So this is going to come in handy not only for this piece, but in any kind of music that you're going to play. So go through your music, look for these patterns. You might want to pencil them off and really just isolate those, work those out, and then start connecting them together. And I guarantee you're going to learn it a lot faster. Now, articulations are very important here since there's a lot of variety that is being demonstrated here. So be sure to incorporate these articulations when you are practicing at the slow tempo. As I said before, don't wait until later to add articulations because then you're going to have to ask your brain to figure out how to coordinate your tongue. So do it in an earlier stage once you feel like you're getting a hang of the notes. You want to be able to demonstrate your attention to detail and the commitment to these articulations. So use a clear and crisp tongue in this etude, especially when you come to the staccatos and your initial attacks. I think the most difficult part of this piece is the breathing. And so finding places to breathe can be an issue here. So you're going to have to find strategic places to grab a breath if you can't make it to the end of a phrase or if there is not a convenient rest. Unfortunately, it's pretty much constant 16th notes. And not a lot of rhythmic variety for you to kind of sneak in a breath. So there are a couple different solutions that you can take. One of them is to drop a note in order to maintain the pulse and give enough time to breathe. For example, in measure 4, you could probably drop that second 16th note and then come back in on the and of 1. However, you can also take deliberate breaths that momentarily interrupt the pulse, but doing it in a musical way. And I kind of prefer that. And when you hear in the recording that I did, I probably do a lot of different breathing because sometimes it's dictated on what's happening at the moment. If I need to grab a breath and I'm running out, I want to find a way that makes it a little bit less conspicuous, but still makes sense musically. And sometimes I'm successful in it, sometimes not. So you can kind of see, if you go back and hear how I've kind of changed things up every now and then you can decide how well you're handling your breathing. Now, for tenor, it requires a little bit more air. So for me, that is a little bit more of a challenge than if I were playing this excerpt on alto. Now, for dynamics, there are really only two indicated dynamics here, forte and fortissimo. But that doesn't mean we can't add a little bit more variety within these sections. In fact, adding some additional dynamics is going to enhance your performance and demonstrate your musical skills. So follow the shape of the phrases if you want to add some subtle crescendos and decrescendos. And also look for contrasting sections to apply contrasting dynamics. So if the mood changes, those are good places to experiment with different dynamics. So for example, in bar 11, the style changes completely. So I like to start that a bit softer and then build up again. The key is to really have fun and experiment with all these different approaches. That's the joy of interpreting music. There is not one proper way to interpret this music. There's not only one way of performing it. So you want to be able to make it your own and to be able to communicate what you feel like the music should go. Now, there are a couple tricky spots in this piece. So if you take a look at the end of measure 6 into measure 7, that's probably one of the trickiest spots here. Not only is it staccato, but you also have these wide intervals to deal with. So it's both a fingering and a response and a tongue issue. So you really have to work that out. So you want to kind of take these components separately. So first, what I would do is I would take a look at that passage and just take out those high Cs and just play that descending arpeggio. And this will solidify your fingers to know where those fingers need to go. And then add the high C. And when that becomes more familiar, then you can start a little bit slowly and work your way up. The key here is to make sure you keep your air moving. And that will help the response and your tongue to be able to get the articulation and to get the notes to respond quickly. So try not to tongue too hard because then it will make the read more difficult to respond. We also have some ornamentation going on. There's a real quick one in bar 20, which is called a mordant. Now, a mordant is just basically a flip up. So it just goes up a note and comes right back down. And as you can see, it's right in the middle of those 16th notes. So first of all, whenever you're working with any kind of ornamentation, play it without any ornamentation. That includes trills or grace notes or mordants or turns. First, you really want to make sure you're solidifying that motion and being very aware of the pulse. And then you can add it and see how it will fit in the context of that pulse. So when you add it, you have to be very quick to make sure that you're not adding any more additional time to it. Thanks for checking out this video, and I hope it's been helpful as you prepare for your All-State Etudes. If you have any questions about this music or any of the other excerpts, please feel free to drop me a line. My email address will be listed below. And if you have any questions about the saxophone studio or any of the ensembles or any other questions about the School of Music at the University of Missouri, please visit our website. And that is also going to be listed in the description below. And on this YouTube channel, you will also find lots of other performances from our ensembles, from the jazz ensembles to the wind ensemble, also the saxophone studio. So please check that out, and good luck.